All right, we are celebrating Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
And in our podcast, we're in the middle of celebrating by highlighting some very famous Christmas carol. Are they Christmas carols? What does it take to be a carol? Does it have to be spiritual in nature, or just
No, Deck the Halls, Jingle Bells,
those are
those are all
Christmas
Christmas
carols?
carols.
But like the hymns that we're
Yeah, this
talking
is more
about,
of a hymn, I think.
so it's not a hymn. Is not really called a carol.
I, I think it could
Maybe
be either.
either.
Yeah,
Okay,
I'm not
if it's
sure.
Christmassy. Okay. But anyway, it's a Christmas carol, a Christmas hymn that we're talking about today. And this is another beautiful one. I know it's one of your very, very favorites.
So
We
I
hear it a lot.
found this, there's a band called Echo Smith that plays this song. And several years ago, I came across it and I remember just playing it over
Again
and
and again.
over.
Yeah.
And so much so that then I started to research what was behind the song because of the lyrics, and we'll go through the lyrics and you'll see it sort of
It's interesting.
kind of shares the dissonance that you can feel at Christmas time.
Yeah.
So.
And that's something we can all relate to um, uh, all the time. So the song is I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day.
Their old familiar carols play, and mild and sweet their songs repeat.
Of peace on earth, goodwill to men. So this is a line that's repeated over and over in the song. And we know that's also the line that the angels announced when Jesus was born. And I love that in the Bible because it's the declaration of heaven says, now peace on earth and goodwill to men. Like this has brought it to the earth.
Yes.
But you mentioned the dissonance.
Yes.
People can easily look around and say, where's the peace? People have asked me before, where's the peace?
Yeah.
So there is a peace. It might not be in what we see right now, but there is peace.
So this Christmas carol was written by Henry
Wadsworth Longfellow, who also wrote The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere,
and
the Song of Hiawatha by the Shores of Gitche Gumee. He was called America's poet. He was very prolific, right?
So he was writing this poem in the 1800s, right, during the Civil War. A little bit about him was...
A little bit before. I think I got a note on it. Yeah, it was...
A little before this?
Yeah, he wrote, actually during it, he wrote it on Christmas Day, 1863.
Yeah. So he was listening to the bells on Christmas Day, and he writes this poem. Now, he had lost his wife years before.
2 years.
She had died in a fire. Her dress had caught on fire. They tried to save her, and she died. And his eldest son, Charlie, had gone into the service, into the army, and he had been severely wounded, and they thought he might be paralyzed. So he gets this news, and also I think you had read that he had kind of stopped writing.
Yeah, he couldn't write poetry for a while. I mean, he was destroyed.
In
I mean,
mourning,
he had lost his wife and his. I mean, his whole life had changed. His son's paralyzed. They're in this horrible war, and it's Christmas Day.
Mm-hmm.
And he writes, and I don't know, but this could very well be in at least partially a real experience. Maybe he actually heard the bells of the church ringing.
I'm sure.
And it inspired him.
Yeah.
And and what Christmas stands for, and it's peace on earth, goodwill to men. You know, you read it on the Christmas cards.
Yeah.
And it's being said and it's being sung. And he
says, and in despair, I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth, I said, for hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill towards men.
To men. And it would be easy for a lot of people to relate to that.
Yeah.
Right? There's so much that looks like there's no peace. It almost looks, in one sense, like that declaration of peace on earth and goodwill to men was nothing.
Was false.
Like it was just, it was just false. And so that's what he's lamenting. It's like, that's what it looks like. And and in despair, I bowed my head. There's no peace on earth. Like, here's this day that we're celebrating, but it didn't happen. You know, it didn't work, or something. There is no peace on earth. And
you mentioned a similarity with the Psalms, that David himself would be very vulnerable, very transparent
Despondent
in
sometimes.
his pain and suffering.
Mhm.
And a lot of times in his psalm, he'll start out with how he's feeling despair, um, grieving, and through the psalm, he moves through to another place.
Yeah, and that's what happens in this particular song. So it starts out pretty sad here.
Yeah.
He says, "It's in despair, I bow my head. There is no peace on earth," I said. And but then he goes on and he says, "But then the bells kept ringing louder and louder."
Yeah. And I just want to point out, I think we did, but just to highlight it, it was the Civil War
Right.
that this country was fighting
It's
itself.
yeah,
And it was very hurtful, I think, to him, especially that his own country was turning on itself
yeah.
and fighting itself, and that he and many others would lose their sons over this.
That's that's the most opposite of peace that you could imagine, your own country fighting and killing itself, killing
Yeah.
itself. And this is what's going on. So you could almost feel and sense the despair. And so he's in this situation that there is no peace. It's
Mhm.
all, it's like he's, he's very cynical in the way the song is presented. But then he goes on, he says, but the bells kept ringing.
And he keeps listening to them for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
There's sort of a theme of listening in this song, and he keeps listening. The bells are ringing like a choir singing. Does anybody hear them? Peace
And,
on earth, goodwill
and the
toward men.
bells rang more loud and deep. God is not dead, nor does he sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's almost like you can feel God rising up
Mm-hmm.
and declaring truth in his song.
There was a similar experience I had where one time I was praying about something that I really needed an answer to, and I was talking to you about it, and I remember you saying, like, I don't know why you're not getting the answer to this, but I do know one thing. God is not up in heaven with his arms crossed saying, you just,
No, you're on your own.
yeah.
I'm doing nothing.
So
He's not doing nothing.
yeah. So when you said that, it kind of broke that part of me that I guess even could be suspicious that God doesn't care.
Mhm.
And it was like, no, that's true. He is not just like turned his back to me.
No, whatever he's doing, he's not doing nothing.
And I guess I relate to Henry Longfellow, that he starts to think on that, that God's not dead and he's not sleeping, but all this crazy is happening, but he's not sleeping.
And that's the truth to look at. God is never not doing nothing. I mean, he's never doing just nothing. The Bible says that he makes all things work together for the good. It also says that it's God working in us, causing us to will and to do his good pleasure. Uh, uh, People look primarily out there for things that need to be fixed in the situations, the circumstances, and they want God to operate in that. But he primarily operates in our hearts to affect the changes that are coming in the world.
We get impatient. We want the outer circumstances to change, but it's actually an inner.
In our heart. And that's why, and God's very patient, and his purpose will come to pass. All the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of his glory. That has to happen inside the hearts of people. And so truth starts to prevail inside the hearts of people. Love prevails. Peace prevails. We know it happens. It's happened in me. We see it in the song. We see a change in the writer here in the song, because at this point in the song, he starts to declare the wrong shall fail, the right prevail, with peace on earth, goodwill to men. Like, this will change. Ultimately, it has to change because God is not dead and he does not sleep.
It says, then ringing, singing on its way, the world revolved from night to day. A voice, a chime, a chant sublime of peace on earth, goodwill to men.
And then it talks about how that chant and those words were going forth, and it says, and with our hearts we will hear them. peace on earth. This is really powerful.
It's an inner inside thing.
Yeah, and with our hearts, we'll hear them. So we look with our eyes. Remember, they asked Jesus, "Well, when will you establish the kingdom?" And essentially, what they're saying is, "When are you going to fix all this?"
Right.
And he says, "It doesn't come like that.
Hmm.
The kingdom is within you," and that's
Hmm.
exactly what the writer is conveying here. He says, "With our hearts, we will hear those words of peace
Peace
on
on
earth,
earth,
goodwill
goodwill.
to men." So we see the change here
Hmm.
happening. We see the shift. You mentioned David in the Psalms. So many of his Psalms are like that. He starts out
There's
with
shift.
despondence, with the problem that's going
Hmm.
on, but then they will end in praise because something happens where he it sort of lifts up his eyes and he sees, "I'm not without help. I'm not without hope. This looks horrible, but God, you are a shield for
Hmm.
me. You're my glory and the lifter of my head." Um, it reminds me of the other the old hymn, "It is well with my soul." Same thing. We were talking about that earlier,
Hmm.
where the man had lost everything. The man had his whole family, I think, all except for one,
Perish.
had died,
Yeah.
and he's in grief and despondency and despair, and he's the story goes he's on a ship in the very place where his family went down,
Hmm.
and he's in grief, and then he looks to God, and somehow this powerful, unexplainable thing that God can do, He's done it in me, He's done it in you. He's takes you from dark to light, just like the song says.
Hmm.
And he says, "It is well. It is
It's
well
well
with
with
my
my
soul."
soul.
Somehow, when nothing around him looked good,
Hmm.
God made it well in his soul, and he
Right.
begins to sing it and declare it. It is well in my soul. I know you tell a story of how when you were in depression, you hadn't sung a note in years. There was no song in your heart. And
Hmm.
one day you caught yourself singing while you were driving to work in your car, and you're
Hmm.
like, "I'm singing.
Yeah.
I'm singing."
Hmm.
It's changing.
Yeah.
Life is swallowing up death, and
Yes.
that's what happens. And that's what he sees in this. It looks hopeless,
Hmm.
but God is
Hmm.
not dead.
Right. I think this also applies to people who hold God responsible for the bad things that
Mhm.
happen in their lives, that they need help to get out of that either depression or anxiety or that negative place. But because they believe that God did it to
Mhm.
them, they're not going to
Yeah.
trust God to get them out of it. Both you and I have
Mhm.
looked back over our histories and think, like,
How
I
do
really believed that
Yeah.
God was against me.
Yeah.
And now I totally believe that He's for me.
Yeah.
So, how did that transition happen? Because, when we see people in that spot, we can relate to them,
Uh-huh.
but it's a personal thing
Mhm.
to where your insides are
Yeah.
allowing God to really change your mind
Yeah.
about the character of
And the
God.
good news is that it happens.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is that it happens, that God is able to overcome that, the lies that I believed, the oppression of my mind, everything about me that was totally ungodly in thinking and in action. How do you get from there to where you're in love with God with all of your heart? He does something. See, this is the thing about this song. God is not dead, nor does he sleep. God is bigger than all of this.
Hmm.
And even though all these situations, they come and go, there's God. There's a spirit in man, and the inspiration of the Almighty gives him understanding. And so something happens where somehow we're he makes us to understand. He causes us to understand,
Yeah.
and it changes our life, and it changes
Hmm.
our situation. And this is why we're so crazy about the message of His grace and His love, because we just want everybody to know that they're
Hmm.
not alone. There is help. There is hope.
I think partly that's why that song so resonated with me years ago. Is I could relate.
Mhm.
You hear these songs, and then you feel your own dissonance to it, and then it's curious to me that someone like Henry Wadsworth
Yeah.
Longfellow would understand.
Well, yeah, and of course he was in a situation of despair, despondency,
Yeah.
and but there's God.
Yeah.
And then God does something, shows something to him. And you can hear the joy in the song as you hear
Like
as
there's
you
a
hear it sung. There's an
elevating of
elevation, and he even describes it. He says the bells ring ever louder, and then he says, "Do you hear it?" And he says there's a voice, a chime, a chant sublime, a peace on earth, goodwill to men. And he says, like a choir, they're singing, and with our hearts we'll hear them. Peace on earth, goodwill to men. Then he said, "Do you hear the bells? They're ringing."
the light, the angels singing, open up your heart and hear
And hear them.
them.
And that's the thing, is that sound of God is there. Let's open our hearts and
Peace
let's
on
hear
earth.
peace on earth. Let's not despair, because the things that we see are temporary.
Mhm.
God has a vision and it's coming to pass.
Right.
And it's, it might be one heart at a time, but it is happening in the hearts of the people. And there is peace on earth. And that peace is in the hearts of the hearers.
Mm.
There's peace. I have received peace for my own life. I'm at peace with myself. I'm at peace with my own flaws and imperfections. I'm at peace with my heavenly Father,
Yeah.
and I am becoming more and more at peace with humanity around me.
Wow.
And I love how that feels. I
Mhm.
love that I don't feel like I'm against the others as much as I used
Mhm.
to feel that. What's happening? The bells are ringing.
Mhm.
I'm hearing that song of peace on earth and goodwill, and I'm opening my heart more and more to that, and it's changing things.
Mm.
And I'm not the only one,
Yeah.
and that's the thing. And this thing will continue to happen, and it ends with the chorus of peace on earth, goodwill to men, peace on earth.
Mhm.
Will there be peace on earth? There's already peace on earth. It's already begun. It's in the hearts of people.
Mhm.
It's already begun, and it's going to spread
Mm.
one heart at a time.
I love the reminder of it starting on the
Yeah.
inside. When Jesus started preaching and he was saying, repent or metanoia, change your mind, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand, he was talking about something on the inside.
Yeah.
Like you said, they were asking him, well, when is it going to come? And
Yeah.
he's like, it doesn't come
Yeah.
there. It
Yeah.
comes
You're looking for a
in
change
here.
out there. He says, I'm saying, let's have a change in here.
And I think as a human, we find, again, that impatience. We want to see it before we believe it, but it's this thing that happens in our heart
Yeah.
that then affects, however imperfectly, it
It
affects
affects
the
in a
world
godly way.
around us. Yeah.
Yeah. It affects us inside first,
Mhm.
and which begins to have an effect in the world around us.
Mhm.
And people want to, um, people aren't thinking so much of the transformation internally. They they want to transform things externally, and
Mhm.
we focus so much more on that. But the peace, the ultimate peace on earth, where love abounds,
Mhm.
is the change internally,
Mm.
and that's what Jesus came to bring us, and he succeeded.
Mhm.
The cross worked,
Yeah.
and there is a revelation of God in that, and
Mhm.
we can know him and know him in a beautiful way that actually has an effect that impacts us. It really transforms us into that very same image, and that's not going away.
Right.
No matter what happens, it continues to increase. More and more and more people are finding God that way,
Mhm.
and that ultimately
It's beautiful.
will
Yeah.
result in the manifestation of what people cry out to see: peace on earth and goodwill to all men.
Yes.
We don't always have to have an enemy.
Yeah.
We don't always have to be bombing somebody, fighting somebody. We don't always have to hate somebody. We don't always have to blame the others, the other group, the other
Mhm.
side.
Mhm.
We get to where there are no sides,
Mhm.
because we've come at peace with ourselves, God, and with our fellow
Yeah.
man.
And I really like that you brought this out in the last episode, that at Christmas time, when we listen to the words of these songs, they really are expressing
God's generosity.
God and what God has done. It's the finished work of what he's done, and not so much on
It
us.
demands nothing from us.
I think in this song, it just says, open up your heart.
Yeah.
Like, just open up your heart
And
and
hear.
really consider this.
Hear the sound. Hear the sound of peace on earth. Will there be peace on earth? It's already here. It's already here.
Yes. And listen to the song. Listen and let, like, kind of marinate in the
Yeah.
song and really take it in.
Yeah. And we hope maybe
Reminder.
this will remind you, maybe inspire you to pay attention to the songs during this season
Yeah.
and take them into your heart, because there's some very, very powerful words that God has given to men, people to
Thank
put
you, Lord
down and
Jesus.
write for us, and we're still
Yeah.
benefiting from these beautiful songs today.
Yeah. I heard the bells on Christmas Day.
Peace on earth, goodwill to men.
Yeah.
Have a great day.
Merry Christmas.